Hello and welcome. I'm Dave. Today we're going to learn about Nest.js Controllers, and I'll provide links to all resources in the description below. I'll also provide a link for you to join my Discord server where you can discuss web development with other students, and you can ask questions that I can answer and receive help from other viewers too. I look forward to seeing you there. This tutorial is lesson 2 of a Nest.js series, and today's starting code is the completed source code from lesson 1. If you haven't watched the previous lesson, there's a link to the playlist for this series in the video description, and I recommend you start at the beginning as each lesson is going to build on the ones before it. Now for a quick review, in the previous lesson we installed the Nest.js CLI, and you see that right here under dev dependencies as well. And then we used that to create a new Nest.js project. We reviewed the relationships between modules. As we open this up, we can see the app right here, app.module. So we reviewed the relationship between the modules and controllers and providers, which we are creating a service with a provider here. So we have our app.service, and we also have our app.controller right here. And we reviewed that relationship overall. And when we created these, they were automatically added to our module as well. And before we finished, we used that same CLI to create a users directory right here that has a users module, and it really does the same thing. Now, when we created our project, of course, it created this default app module, controller, and service for us. But now we created each one of these as we went. So we have a users module first, and when we use that CLI, we followed this pattern. Let me pull this down for us just a little bit here. And so what we did is type nestg module and then whatever the name is. And then we did the same for controller, as we really created an empty controller file and that name. So for users, of course, we put users there. And before we finished, we also did the same for the provider, but we don't type provider, we type service and the name there. So we did that, and then our users service was created. So we could say users right here, just so I'm not confusing anyone. That's how we create each one of these. Now today, we're focused on the controller, and we created the users controller. So let's take a look at the users controller that we have right now, and we can see there's not much in it. And really the same goes for the service we created. But when we look back at the module, they were both added to the module. Let's quickly look at the docs. We're in the Nest.js docs, and we can see here under controllers that controllers are responsible for handling incoming requests and returning responses to the client. And you can see here's the client. Here is the HTTP request, and it's going to a controller. Now, a Nest.js application can have more than one controller, and we'll see how those are dedicated to routes in just a moment. But just below, I also want to highlight, it says the controller's purpose is to receive specific requests for the application, and the routing mechanism controls which controller receives the requests. And we'll look at how that works. It says frequently each controller has more than one route, and then different routes can perform different actions. So let's go back and start to work on our users controller. We are back in VS Code, and this is what we get when we create the controller file. So you can see we import controller from Nest.js Common, and then we have controller here with an @ symbol. This is a decorator, and we will see lots of these in Nest.js. This is saying this is going to handle the user's route. So essentially, whatever our domain is, and then it would have a /users, and that's the route this will handle, at least the parent route, because we can put other routes inside of this where the parent here is /users, and then we might have /something else as well. So that's what this is doing. And what are decorators? Well, really, decorators are essentially functions prefixed with the @ symbol, and they run automatically when called. So you can just think of this as Nest is running a predefined function here, and that's what a good framework does. It abstracts some of this logic so we don't have to write that ourselves. So this is how we start out, and then you can see export class users controller. So inside of here, we need to essentially plan out the routes that we want to handle. So we're going to have a /users, and I could put in, I guess, let me put in comment here and close it out here. And then inside, I could put in each one of these routes. We're going to have a users. After that, we're also going to have a /users, and then we're going to pass in a param here inside of the URL, so the ID of the user, where we want to get one user. Then we're going to have another /users here, and let me put the HTTP methods, because this would be a GET request. This would also be a GET request, so the read in CRUD. This would be a post where we create a new user. After that, we're also going to have a patch, and I know some of you would also use put as well, but patch because we might just change one thing in the user record and not the entire user. And here this would be /users, and then once again we would say the ID as a param for the user to identify the user that we want to patch, and then delete. Once again, this would be users and ID to identify the user that we want to delete. So now let's go ahead and create the route for each one of these. So we'll start with our get users, where we want to return all of the users. And we'll do that first with the get decorator here. So we'll put in get, and I'll press tab here. And yes, it automatically imported that at the top when I did that. And then we call that function. Now, once again, I'll put a comment here, and this is get for /users, where we will get all of the users. And now I can just remove it from here, and we'll just go down our list as we go. So after we call that get decorator, saying this is for the get route, I'm going to call this function that it calls after find all. And here, let's just return an empty array for now. We know this will be an array of users eventually. Now, after this, I'm going to scroll just a little bit. And now we'll have another get whoa, I didn't go to the right line here. Just a second. And now we'll have another get decorator here. So I'll put get once again. This will be for the get protocol, and then we'll have users and the ID param. So how will we handle this? Well, I'm going to call this function find one, but we need to pass in an ID, and we actually need to say up here that this has the ID param as well. So let's put in the string, and then we put in a :ID that represents that param that will be in the URL. So when we put all of this together, we have users here, which indicates /users, and then we have ID here, which indicates the /ID for this get route. And then we'll have a find one function. Now it's going to need to identify that param as it comes in. We do that with another decorator, and it's the param decorator. So I'll press tab, and let's make sure that imported as well. So now we have the param decorator imported at the top also. And inside of this param, then we also need to pass in an ID string. Notice here it doesn't have the colon like it does inside of the get decorator. We just put in ID as a string. And then after that, we need to give the type, not a comma here though. We'll just say ID, and this is type string that we expect to receive. All params are strings. And from here, we'll return an object that has the ID in for now. And you can see we're not really handling the logic. The logic will be handled inside of our service when we create that, and then we'll inject that into our controller. But we're not doing that right now. We're just creating the routes. So these are the two get routes. Now let's quickly talk about this though, because what if we had another route? You wouldn't want to put it underneath this, because this is a param. So whatever comes after this slash will be read as the ID. So if I wanted another get route here that would follow users, so I would have get, and then inside of this, let's say I wanted to get all of our users that were assigned the role of intern, and I sent that to a route that was intern. So this would be a get route, and it would be /users/intern, or I should say maybe interns, because we would want to get all of the interns. Now there's a couple of things to note here. We would also need a function that was not find all, because we've already defined find all. So we would want maybe find all interns, for example, as our function here. And then let's return an array. But this won't work because it comes after the find one here, where we're passing this ID param. So when we go down our waterfall of routes inside of our controller, what's going to happen is we would get to this route right here, and it would read anything after the user's slash as the ID. So we could go ahead and run this right now, and I could send in the name or possibly nothing, and this would return an empty right here instead of having the ID. Let's go ahead and do that so you can just see what I'm talking about. So I've saved this file. We need to control backtick to open the terminal. Then let's go ahead and type npm run start dev, and we can check these 3 routes, and we'll see the issue here that we currently have as well. So everything should be running. It looks good down here in the terminal. I'm going to close that. Now I'm using Thunder Client. If you're not familiar with Thunder Client, you can search Visual Studio extensions over here. This is the extensions button right here. And then when we search for Thunder Client, we find that, and you can install it in your Visual Studio Code. That's what I'm using to test these endpoints. So once you do that, you should see it over here on the left. I've got a little circle and a lightning bolt. That is Thunder Client. Go to localhost 3000 because that's where our application is running. And from there, I'm going to send a query, and I'm going to just send it to users/users here. So this should return an empty array right now when I send this. And that's what we've got. Okay, so now I'm going to send to /1, say a user ID of 1, and this should return the object with an ID of 1. But what if I went to /interns? Because we also set up that get route. I'll send that, and now I get an ID of interns because it read anything after that slash with /interns as the ID value. So we don't want that. If you were going to have another route, you would need to put this before the route that has the ID here. So if I just move the interns route up above it, for example, and now I go ahead and test this, we should get an empty array. And we do. So the order does matter here, just kind of like a waterfall. You think about how the route will be read and what would happen. So if you had a specific static route like users/interns, that would need to be before a dynamic route that could accept any ID here as a param. So just consider that when you're building your routes. Now, I don't need the find all interns route, and I'm going to delete that, but I wanted to give that as an example to show how important the order can be. We are ready for our next route now. So we've created both of our get routes. We're ready to post the users. So post a new user. And so what I want to do now is start with the post decorator. Once again, I'll press tab and it should import that at the top. So I've got post, and this would be a post method that would just go to the user's route. And once we have that, we're going to have a create function. Now, inside of the create function, we're going to need to receive some data to know what to create for the user. And to do that, we're not going to read a param, we're going to read the body of the request because we should be sending that data. So I'm going to press tab here, and it should import body at the top as well. And we do now have body imported here also. So now I'll bring this back down, and inside the body, we don't need anything, but afterwards we need to say essentially what type the body is. And here, I'm just going to say this is a user. So we're sending user data. And right now, I'll just put in not an array, but an empty object, and it will be an object type for now. We'll get more specific about this in the future, but not today as we're just creating the route. So here, I'm just going to return the user. So whatever we send, so let's Control S to save. Let's go back to testing this once again. And now we'll switch this to a post request, and we won't go to /interns. It will be just a /users here. So localhost 3000 /users. Let's go to the body, and you can see in here, I've got name, email, and role. Let me put my name in here. I had an empty name for now. So this will be the user information of the user we want to create. So let's go ahead and send this. And that's what we got as a response, was that same user information back. And we got the 201 created response instead of a 200 like we did with the GET request. So if I come back to GET, send that, you can see 200 okay, but a post request to create a new user is 201 created. That's everything we want. And Nest.js is handling most of that for us. That was fairly easy to create. And now we need to create the update route, the patch method. I'm going to copy what we have here for find one, and I'm also going to delete the post that we no longer need in our list up here. And now underneath the post, I'm going to paste this in. I'm just going to change a couple of things. So one is we need the patch method here, and I need to spell patch correctly, and now I'll press tab just so it imports it at the top. We'll make sure we've got patch. Yes, we do. Okay, after patch, we're passing in an ID again because this needs to be or identify whichever user we need to update. So this is the patch method here in our comment. It still goes to /users and then /ID. So we still have a param. Here I'm going to change the name of this to update, all lowercase. And after that, we need to use the param still for the ID, just like we did up here in find one. It is still a string, but we're also going to have a body with the update information. So now we need to put a comma after the string type here, and then we'll use that body decorator once again. And after that, instead of inside of that, we'll have our user update, and that's just what I'm going to call this to identify it. And we'll say that is also an empty object for now. So then we're just going to return not only the ID in this new object, but we'll also spread in whatever data we get for that user update. So this will be the object that's returned now when we send a patch request. So let's try that out back here in Thunder Client, switch over to a patch, there it is, and we still have some information here to update. So let's say we're updating this user and we're switching the name to Dan. Let's try that, and now we'll go ahead and send the information. And I got a 404, and the reason that I got a 404 was I just sent that to /users. I didn't say what user with the ID param that I wanted to update. So I need to send something in place of that ID param here. So I'll just send the number 1. Let's send that again. And now we got the 200, and yes, we returned that same information. And of course, we had ID in there first, and then we spread in the information that we sent. So that route is also working as long as we put an ID in the URL as well. Now let's go back to the controller because we still have a delete route to create. I'll just delete both of these here at the top as well, as we no longer need that comment. Now under this, let's go ahead and copy the find one once again, and I'm going to paste it right underneath the patch. So there we go. I'll scroll just a little bit. Now this needs to be delete instead of get. So we'll do that, press tab once again, so it should import at the top. We still need to pass in the ID so we know which user to delete. I'll switch this to the delete method here in our comment as well. This won't be a find one function. We'll rename this delete. We still need to use the param decorator and identify the ID here, and the ID is still a string type. Let's just return that ID as well. So this should be the delete route. Okay, we'll save, and from here we'll go back and we will now test out the delete route. Once again, it needs that ID in the URL. It doesn't really need the body, but it won't hurt to leave it in there either way. So I'll just click over here to query. Let's go ahead and send that, and we get the ID back. So all of the routes we've created are now working. But there's one type of parameter we haven't handled yet, and you see that listed right here in Thunder Client, query parameters. So let's take a look at that in our controller as well. I'm going to scroll back up to our first route here that has find all. So we're just getting all of the users. And what if we also wanted to allow that to filter for a query parameter? So I'll put or here, and we might have /users, and then we might have something like role equals value. And this is a query parameter. It's different than a param that you would find in the URL like you see here with the ID. Here you'd have the question mark, role equals value. If you had a second query parameter, you might have the ampersand and then have something like age equals another value. And of course you would put whatever age you want there, 42, 28, doesn't matter. So those are query params. Let's handle that in our find all as well. So it needs to be optional, and that is one thing, but another is we need to say at query. I'm press tab here, and that should import at the top. Let's make sure. Yep, we've got query right there. I'm also going to press Alt Z so it just wraps that line down. It's getting a little long. But after our at query, we need to say inside of here what the query param that we're looking for is, and this will be role. Now after that, we need to define role, and we can do that with our TypeScript here. So we'll say this is optional, so we have the question mark and then a colon, and then this is going to have several possible values. One would be intern. After that, let's also say this could be an engineer. And then eventually let's also have an admin, as you saw with the user where I was trying to add a user that was an admin. So these are the three possible values that we are identifying with TypeScript for role, but it is optional. And again, we're not handling the logic there, but we'll go ahead and try to send this as well through Thunder Client. So we'll go back to Thunder Client. Let's go back to our GET request. Let's just get all users, and now I'm going to put in a question mark and say role. Let me put in lowercase equals, and I'll put in admin like this. Let's go ahead and send. And yes, we got an empty array back once again, but we just want to know that it can handle something like that. Also note how Thunder Client handles the query param here. You could enter them here. We uncheck, it removes that as well. If we check, it puts it back in the URL up above. So now you know how to handle both params in the URL, like you see here with the user's ID, and also query params, like you see here with the role. We also know how to get the body out of a post request or a patch, or if we sent a put request where we're using the body as well. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to cover the logic, what we'll create inside of our user's service and inject into our controller class that can handle the logic that we want here to do the appropriate things with the data, because right now we're not getting the data we want, we're just getting something back to prove that our routes are correct. But this is the skeleton of the controller that has all of the routes handled for our user's REST API. Remember to keep striving for progress over perfection, and a little progress every day will go a very long way. Please give this video a like if it's helped you. And thank you for watching and subscribing. You're helping my channel grow. Have a great day, and let's write more code together very soon.